My name is Alexander Monroe. I'm 32 years old, and I just sat silently in the back of a crowded courtroom as my own family called me a failure. Right before the judge in my brother's multimillion-dollar fraud trial looked directly at me and asked me to take the bench myself. Before I tell you about the stunned, horrified look on my father's face, or the way my mother's hand flew to her mouth as if she'd seen a ghost, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I found that stories like this, about family and justice, resonate everywhere. The air in the courtroom was thick with a toxic mix of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. Up front, in the polished oak benches reserved for family, sat my parents, Richard and Evelyn Monroe, and my older brother, Marcus, the golden child, the CEO, the defendant. They looked like a portrait of success even now. My father, with his jaw set, exuding confidence. My mother, dabbing at a dry eye with a silk handkerchief, a perfect performance of maternal concern. Marcus, my brother, just looked bored, arrogant, like this whole federal investigation was just a tedious interruption to his otherwise brilliant life. And then there was me, in the back row, in a simple suit that probably cost less than my father's tie, a ghost in my own family's tragedy. The prosecution was laying out its case, and the evidence was damning. Falsified financials, misleading investor calls, a web of deceit so tangled that the presiding judge, a man named Harold Harlan, was visibly struggling. He was a good man, a veteran judge from the state circuit, but this was the big leagues. This was federal. He kept adjusting his glasses, his brow furrowed in a permanent state of confusion. My father leaned over to my mother and whispered, a little too loudly, "Marcus will walk. This old fool can't even follow the money." I just sat there, my hands resting on a thin leather briefcase in my lap. I felt the familiar sting, the dull ache of being invisible. To them, I was just Alex, the quiet one, the one who went to a state school while Marcus went to the Ivy League, the one with a quiet, unimpressive job in law, while Marcus was a tech mogul featured in magazines. I was the family's shadow, the footnote in the grand story of Marcus Monroe. Then, Judge Harlan did something no one expected. He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking through the tense silence. "This court will take a brief recess," he announced, his voice strained. "I need to consider a matter of jurisdictional authority." As the room began to empty, a court clerk, a young woman with a nervous look on her face, made a beeline for me, weaving through the expensive suits. She leaned in close, her voice a barely audible whisper. "Judge Monroe," she said, her eyes wide. "Chief Judge Winters is on the line. Everything is proceeding as you anticipated." I gave a single, slow nod. The ghost was about to come back to life. To understand why I was there, why I was a ticking time bomb in the back of that courtroom, you have to go back a few years. You have to go back to the day I officially became a ghost. It was in the vast, book-lined chambers of Chief Judge Diane Winters. The scent of old paper and lemon polish filled the air. Diane had been my mentor in law school, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and a spine to match. She was the one who saw something in me that even I didn't fully recognize, who pushed me through brutal late-night study sessions, and who secretly put my name forward for the federal judiciary. The confirmation process had been a brutal, year-long gauntlet of FBI background checks, financial disclosures, and Senate hearings, all of which I had managed to keep completely off my family's radar. It wasn't that hard. Their radar was permanently fixed on Planet Marcus. They were never paying much attention to my little corner of the universe anyway. I remember the weight of the heavy black robe on my shoulders for the first time. It felt heavier than I expected, like a physical manifestation of responsibility. Diane didn't smile. She just looked at me with an intensity that could peel paint. "Alex," she said, her voice low and resonant. "Congratulations. You've earned this. But now the hard part begins. And I'm not talking about the cases. I'm talking about your name, the Monroe name." She walked over to the large window overlooking the city, her silhouette framed against the skyline. "Your father, Richard Monroe, is a powerful man. He's a shark who has spent a lifetime swimming in murky waters. He has friends in this city who would love to have a federal judge in their pocket, and he has enemies who would love to see his son, any son, fall from grace just to spite him. They will come for you, Alex. The friends will come with favors, the enemies with traps. She told me a story then about a young judge a decade earlier, a brilliant man from a prominent political family. His father had called in a single, seemingly innocent favor on a zoning dispute. It was enough to create the appearance of impropriety, a shadow that followed him for the rest of his short, stalled career. He never recovered, Diane said, her voice grim. His name became a weapon used against him. And your brother, she continued, turning to face me, her eyes locking onto mine, is a walking headline. He courts attention. If he knew about this, he'd use it. He wouldn't be able to resist. He'd drop your name at parties, hint at your influence to close deals. He'd tarnish your reputation before you ever had a chance to build it. They will not see Judge Monroe. They will see an angle to be played. We stood there in silence for a moment, the gravity of it all settling in. My dream, my greatest achievement, was also my greatest vulnerability. Then she laid out the plan, the pact that would define the next few years of my life. You keep a low profile, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Your appointment is public record, but it's a needle in a haystack unless someone is looking for it. You do the work. You build your career on merit, on integrity, not on the Monroe name. You stay away from your father's world. Let them think you're just a quiet, unassuming lawyer. Let them underestimate you. It is your only shield. It's the only way to protect yourself, to ensure that when you pass judgment, it's your judgment, and not a shadow of his influence. So I agreed. I became a ghost by choice. It was a strategic decision, a necessary sacrifice to protect my integrity. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Every dismissive comment, every pitying look from my family, was a small cut, a constant reminder of the lonely path I had chosen. I just told myself it was for a greater purpose. I was playing the long game. My father's obsession with Marcus wasn't just simple favoritism. It was deeper, more pathological than that. It was rooted in his own failure, a ghost that haunted our family long before I chose to become one myself. He never talked about it, but the whole family knew the story of Monroe Holdings, the company he'd inherited from my grandfather and run into the ground in the late 90s through a series of bad, aggressive bets. He lost a fortune, but more than that, he lost face. The shame of it clung to him like a second skin. My mother once told me, in a rare moment of candor, that for a year after, he barely left the house. The man who lived for the deal, for the win, had been dealt the ultimate loss. From that day on, he was determined to rebuild the Monroe legacy, not through himself, but through his firstborn son. Marcus was his second chance, his redemption project. Every success Marcus had was my father's success. Every dollar Marcus earned was a dollar my father had clawed back from the abyss of his own failure. This wasn't just about a father wanting the best for his son. It was about a man desperately trying to rewrite his own history. The family's entire emotional and financial portfolio, including money that should have been set aside for a college fund or other things, was invested in Project Marcus. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner with painful clarity. It was a few years before the trial. The house was filled with the scent of turkey and my father's ego. Marcus had just closed a huge funding round, and the air was thick with celebration. My father, standing at the head of the long, polished dining table, raised his crystal glass of wine. "A toast," he boomed, his voice echoing in the dining room. "To Marcus, a true Monroe, a builder, an architect of the future. Some men are content to follow, but a Monroe must lead. He's creating an empire, a legacy that will last for generations." He looked around the table, his eyes shining with a feverish light. "People talk about what you leave behind for your children, an inheritance, a stock portfolio. That's nothing. A real man leaves a name that means something, and Marcus is making the Monroe name mean success again." He looked right past me, his gaze settling on Marcus with an almost desperate pride. I felt myself shrink in my chair, the familiar feeling of being a spectator at my own family's life washing over me. Later that evening, after the guests had thinned, I found my father alone in his study, swirling a brandy. I just had a significant victory of my own. A pro bono case I had won against a slumlord, preventing a dozen families from being illegally evicted right before Christmas. I thought naively that he might be interested. "Dad," I said tentatively, "I had some good news at work this week." He glanced up from his brandy, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Oh," I told him the story. I told him about the families, the corrupt landlord, the complex housing laws I had navigated. I was proud of it, felt important. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his drink. He looked at me, a faint, condescending smile on his lips. "That's nice, Alex. Good for you. Doing your little bit of good in the world." He patted me on the shoulder, his touch light and dismissive. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make a call to a contact in Singapore for Marcus." The condescension was so casual, so effortless. To him, my career in law was a quaint hobby. It didn't build empires. It didn't get your picture in Forbes. It was, in his eyes, a failure to live up to the Monroe name. A name he was trying so desperately to salvage. I wasn't just the second son. I was the son who reminded him of a path not taken. A quieter, less glorious path that didn't erase his own past sins. And in that moment, I understood that I would never be enough for him, because my successes would never be the ones he needed to heal his own wounds. The moment that truly set the stage for everything, the moment I went from being a passive observer to an active architect of my brother's fate, happened about a year before the trial. Marcus showed up at my small, unassuming apartment unannounced. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car and a look of manufactured charm that always set my teeth on edge. "Hey, little brother," he said, striding in like he owned the place and dropping a thick binder on my coffee table. The thud echoed in the quiet room. "Got a minute? Need you to put those big-brain lawyer skills to use." He smirked. "It's probably above your pay grade, but you were always good with the small print. A real details guy." It was a partnership agreement with a major tech firm. A company-making deal. A deal that would cement his status as a tech visionary. "My lawyers have looked at it," he said, waving a dismissive hand as he paced my small living room. "But they're all just billing hours. You know how it is. They cover the basics, but they don't have the instinct. I need a real opinion. Give it a once-over for me. A little family favor." Family favor. He only ever remembered we were family when he needed something. For the next 2 weeks, I lived and breathed that contract. I took it to my own quiet chambers after hours, spreading the pages out under the soft glow of my desk lamp. I worked late into the night, fueled by black coffee and a lifetime of being underestimated. The contract, as drafted, was a disaster. It was full of loopholes that would have given the partner company far too much control over Marcus's intellectual property. He was so focused on the headline valuation that he was ready to give away the entire store. He could have lost everything. My first instinct was just to fix it, to protect him, because despite everything, he was my brother. But then I thought about his smug face, his casual cruelty. I thought about my father's dismissive words, and I realized they would never learn. He would take my work, claim it as his own, and I would remain the footnote. That's when a cold, clear purpose settled over me. I wasn't just going to fix it. I was going to fortify it. I saw an opportunity. I knew my brother. I knew he was arrogant and careless. He wouldn't just take my advice. He'd steal it and call it his own. So, I did more than just close the loopholes that would hurt him. I added one that would serve as a permanent check on his hubris. I set a trap. Deep within the dense, mind-numbing liability section, I drafted a new clause. It was a masterpiece of legalese, designed to look like standard boilerplate but with the fangs of a viper. It was a personal indemnification clause. It stipulated that the CEO, personally, not just the company as a legal entity, would be held financially and legally liable for any damages resulting from material misrepresentation of financial data or performance metrics provided to the partner during due diligence. It was a time bomb, a clause designed to pierce the corporate veil and attach itself directly to the man in charge. I was thinking of a specific legal precedent, Smith versus Van Gorkum, a case that drilled down on the fiduciary duty of corporate officers. I knew Marcus would never read it closely. He'd see that I had fixed the main issues and just sign off, eager to get to the press conference. I sent him the revised document with a simple email. Marcus, I've cleaned it up and added some standard liability protections. You should be good to go. He replied an hour later. Thanks. Knew you'd be useful for something. He never asked a single question about the changes I'd made. He just took the win. And I let him. I was playing the long game, and I had just placed my queen on the board. A few weeks later, I was watching CNBC, a habit I'd picked up to keep tabs on my brother's world. And there he was, Marcus, being interviewed by a fawning host about his brilliant new partnership. Marcus, a spectacular deal, the host said. But rumor has it this almost fell through. There were some snags in the contract. What happened? Marcus leaned back in his chair, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. It's all about instinct, he said smoothly, the picture of a corporate visionary. My lawyers, bless their hearts, were ready to sign, but I had a gut feeling. Something wasn't right. So I took the contract home, stayed up all night myself, went through it line by line, and found some critical flaws that would have been devastating. A little legal instinct of my own, you could say. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty in this business. My jaw tightened. The blood pounded in my temples. He didn't just take the credit. He painted a whole fantasy around it, starring himself as the hero, the detail-oriented genius who saved the day. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. But I didn't get angry. I got methodical. The anger was a hot fire, but I channeled it into a cold, precise action. I used a screen recording software and saved the entire interview to a secure, encrypted hard drive. I labeled the file exhibit__CNBC_interview.mp4. Then I went to my email. I printed the entire chain between us. His initial request, my response with the revised document attached, and his dismissive thank you. I saved it as a PDF. exhibit_B_email_chain.pdf. That weekend, I was at my best friend Ryan's garage. Ryan was the only person on earth who knew my secret. He was a mechanic, a guy who understood how things worked, from complex engines to even more complex people. His garage, filled with the smell of gasoline and hard work, was my sanctuary. He was my anchor to reality. I told him what Marcus had done, showing him the video on my phone. He wasn't surprised. The guy's a leech, Alex. Always has been, he said, wiping grease from his hands with a worn rag. He'd steal the fillings from your teeth and then complain about the taste. It's more than that, Ryan, I said, my voice low and steady. He's creating a public record of his own lies. He's building my case for me. He just publicly took ownership of every word in that contract, including the one that's going to hang him out to dry. Ryan stopped what he was doing and looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes. He wasn't looking at a victim anymore. This isn't just about getting back at him, is it? He asked quietly. This is different. You've got a plan. Justice, Ryan, I said. He's going to fall. He's too arrogant not to. He thinks he's above the rules. And when he does, I'm going to make sure the truth falls with him hard. I'm not going to be the one to push him, but I'm damn well going to make sure he lands on a pile of rocks I helped put there. I took a sip of my beer. The taste was sharp and clear. I wasn't the family shadow anymore. I was a silent hunter, gathering the evidence, oiling the gears of a machine he didn't even know existed. The long game was on. The first tremor of the earthquake came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Through the official channels at work, a new case file landed on the docket for preliminary review. A federal fraud investigation. The target company, Monroe Innovations. My brother's company. My heart hammered against my ribs. A strange, dissonant chord of dread and vindication. It was happening. Sooner than I'd expected, but just as I'd predicted. I followed protocol to the letter. I immediately filed a formal recusal, citing a clear conflict of interest. My role officially was over before it began. But before I passed the file on, I made a copy of the initial filing. It was all there. Allegations of wire fraud, securities fraud, a classic house of cards built on inflated user numbers and phantom revenue streams. The prosecution already had a strong case, but it was corporate. They were targeting the company. They didn't have the silver bullet to tie it directly and personally to Marcus. Not yet. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Marcus from a burner phone. He needed to have one last chance to do the right thing, and I needed the call to be on the record in my own mind. He picked up on the third ring, his voice impatient and clipped. "Alex, what's up? I'm in the middle of a board dinner." Of course he was. "I'll be quick, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, devoid of any emotion. "You know that contract I helped you with last year? The partnership deal." There was a pause. I could hear the clinking of silverware in the background. Vaguely. "What about it?" "You should probably have your lawyer take a very close look at the personal indemnification clause I added. It's in Section 12, subsection C. It might become relevant soon. Just some friendly advice." I heard him scoff. A short, sharp sound of derision. "Alex, I pay a team of the best corporate lawyers in the country a combined salary that would make your head spin. I think they know what they're doing. They get paid to worry about the details, so I don't have to." "This is a detail you should worry about, Marcus," I said, my voice firm. "Look, I appreciate you trying to play big-shot lawyer. I really do," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I've got it handled. Why don't you stick to whatever it is you do?" He hung up. I put the phone down. The warning had been delivered. It was on the record. He couldn't say he didn't know. He was walking into the storm with his eyes wide open, blinded by his own arrogance. And I had just handed him one last chance to find an umbrella, a chance I knew he would never take. The choice was now entirely his. A few weeks later, I was at a mandatory bar association mixer at a swanky downtown hotel. I hated these things. It was a room full of lawyers making small talk, peacocking their successes, and sizing each other up. I was nursing a club soda in a corner, doing my best impression of a potted plant, when a familiar face approached me. It was Sophia Chin. We had been in a few classes together back in law school. We weren't close friends, just acquaintances. I knew she had gone on to the U.S. Attorney's Office, a real rising star with a reputation for being tenacious. I, on the other hand, was, as far as she knew, just Alex Monroe, a quiet guy who probably worked in some sleepy corporate law department, the kind of lawyer who reviewed documents, not the kind who made headlines. She had no idea I was a federal judge. "Alex Monroe? Wow, blast from the past," she said with a genuinely friendly smile. "I almost didn't recognize you without a pile of books in front of your face. What are you up to these days?" "Just keeping my head down," I said evasively. "Corporate consulting. You know how it is. What about you? Still fighting the good fight?" Her smile tightened. "Trying to. Actually, I'm on a case right now that's driving me crazy. This tech CEO, a real piece of work from a big local family. You've probably heard of them, the Monroes." She said the name without a hint of recognition, and I managed to keep my face a perfect blank. "We have him dead to rights on cooking the books, but he's so slippery. His lawyers are trying to bury us in paperwork, arguing that he was detached from the day-to-day financials. They're trying to pin it all on his CFO. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Sounds tough." "It is," she sighed, taking a sip of her wine. "He built this whole company on lies. The arrogance is just staggering. We just need that one perfect piece of evidence to lock him in, something that shows he knew exactly what he was doing and was personally responsible. A silver bullet." I saw my opening. It wasn't a breach of ethics. It was a hypothetical conversation between two legal professionals. I leaned in slightly as if sharing a trade secret. "You know," I said, my voice casual, "sometimes with guys like that, the key isn't in the big financial statements. Everyone expects you to look there. It's in the fine print of their own contracts. The boilerplate stuff they never read, the things they delegate. They get so focused on the big picture, the money, the promotion for themselves, they don't realize they've already signed their own confession in a liability clause somewhere." Sophia's eyes lit up with a spark of interest. She stopped and looked at me, really looked at me, a new respect in her eyes. "The fine print," That's a good thought, Alex. A really good thought. We've been so focused on the fraud itself, maybe we haven't looked closely enough at the documents that enabled it. She smiled, a genuine one this time. Thanks. I owe you one. Happy to help, I said. She walked away, energized, already pulling out her phone, no doubt to text her paralegal team. I watched her go, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over me. I hadn't broken any rules. I hadn't discussed an active case. I had simply given an old colleague a piece of general advice. A piece of advice that I knew would lead her directly to Section 12, subsection C. The time bomb was now armed, and the prosecutor herself was about to light the fuse. The day the trial date was officially set, I made another call. This one was to Chief Judge Diane Winters. It was a conversation we had been preparing for years. Diane, it's Alex, I said, speaking into the secure line in my chambers. I know, she replied. Her voice was all business, sharp and clear. I saw the docket. Monroe versus the United States. It's been assigned to Harlan. Judge Harold Harlan. A fine judge, a pillar of the state legal community, but a man who had spent 30 years dealing with state-level crimes. Robberies, assaults, local political corruption. Complex interstate wire fraud was a different language, and it wasn't one he was fluent in. We both knew it. He was a good man who was about to be put in an impossible position. The contingency we discussed might be necessary, Diane, I said. It wasn't a question. I agree, she said without hesitation. Harlan's a proud man, but he's not a foolish one. He knows his limits. He won't risk a mistrial or a successful appeal because of a jurisdictional error. The odds of him recusing himself once the federal nature of the evidence becomes undeniable are high. This was the plan we had laid out years ago, the ultimate failsafe. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a legally sound procedure to ensure a fair trial and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. A judge recuses, and the chief judge reassigns the case. It happens every day. The only difference here was that we anticipated the move and had the reassignment order ready to go, ensuring a seamless transition of power with no delay in the trial. I'll have the order drafted and ready, Diane said. It will be conditional upon Harlan's formal, written recusal. If he decides to proceed, it stays in a locked file and is shredded after the trial. If he steps down, my clerk will sign it, timestamp it, and the marshal will deliver it to the courtroom. It will be clean, Alex. Buy the book. Thank you, Diane. Don't thank me, she said, a rare warmth in her voice. You earned the right to have your work protected from your family's chaos. Now go do what you have to do. Be the judge I know you are. I hung up. The final piece was in place. My attendance at the trial wouldn't be as a passive, wounded spectator. It would be as a professional, a silent guardian of the process, waiting in the wings, ready to step onto the stage when my cue was called. And I would be ready. I walked into the imposing granite and marble lobby of the federal courthouse on the first day of the trial and felt a chill, despite the humid summer air outside. This was my world, my professional home. Yet today I was entering it as an intruder, a ghost haunting the edges of my own family's drama. I chose a seat in the very back row, a strategic position where I could see everyone without being easily seen. And I watched my family. They were a united front of denial, a performance for the press and for themselves. My father stood tall, a pillar of righteous indignation, clapping Marcus on the shoulder and whispering what I was sure were words of encouragement. My mother was fussing with Marcus's tie, her face a mask of loving concern, though her eyes were hard and defiant. Then she saw me. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise, before settling into a familiar look of pained disappointment. She leaned over to my father and I saw my name form on her lips. Alexander. He glanced back, his expression one of sheer annoyance, as if my very presence here was an embarrassment, a stain on their carefully constructed image of family solidarity. He gave me a look that said, "You don't belong here." A reporter from the local paper tried to ask my father a question. "Mr. Monroe, do you have a comment on the prosecution's claims?" My father waved him away with a flick of his wrist. "My son is innocent. He's a visionary, and this is nothing more than a witch hunt by people who are jealous of his success. The Monroe family stands with him, united. United. The word felt like a shard of glass in my gut. As the courtroom filled up, a man sat down next to me. It was Thomas Whitaker, a close family friend from my parents' generation, a retired investment banker with kind eyes and a sharp mind. He was one of the few people who looked at me and didn't seem to be comparing me to Marcus. He leaned in, his voice a low rumble. Their performance is impressive. I'll give them that. His eyes were fixed on my parents. They have no idea, do they, son? I just gave a slight shake of my head, a small, sad smile on my lips. No, sir, they don't. Their loss, he said, and turned his attention to the front. His simple words of validation were like a shield against the cold front coming from my family. Just before the proceedings began, Vanessa, Marcus's fiancée, spotted me. She looked terrified, a deer in the headlights of an oncoming legal truck. She came over, her hands twisting the strap of her expensive purse. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He says it's all a misunderstanding. Clerical error. Is it? Is he telling the truth?" I looked into her frightened eyes. I couldn't lie, but I couldn't tell her the whole truth either. My heart ached for her. She was just another casualty of my brother's ambition. "The evidence will speak for itself, Vanessa," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "All you can do now is listen very, very carefully." She searched my face for a long moment, looking for a comfort I couldn't give her. Then she scurried back to her seat next to my mother, who gave her a reassuring pat on the arm that didn't look reassuring at all. The session began. The trap was set. The players were in position, and I settled in to watch the show, knowing I was the only person in the room who already knew how it was going to end. The prosecution, led by a fiercely prepared Sophia Chun, was a masterclass in methodical destruction. She didn't go for a knockout punch right away. Instead, she started by building a foundation, brick by painstaking brick, detailing the intricate web of shell corporations and falsified invoices that Monroe Innovations had used to inflate its value. She put an accountant on the stand who, under a grant of immunity, walked the jury through cooked books and phantom revenue streams. The jury was rapt, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning anger. I watched Judge Harlan. He was trying his best, gripping his pen, making notes, but he was out of his depth. Every time Sophia mentioned interstate wire transfers or SEC regulation SK, a new bead of sweat would pop on his forehead. He was a ship captain caught in a hurricane, desperately trying to steer by stars he didn't recognize. He was used to cases with a gun, a victim, a clear motive. This was a crime committed with spreadsheets and lies, a world away from his experience. My father, in the front row, still looked confident, but it was starting to look forced, like a man smiling through a heart attack. He kept whispering to his lawyer, a high-priced corporate shark named Benson who seemed more adept at billing than at federal criminal defense. My mother's smile was frozen on her face, a brittle thing that looked like it might shatter at the slightest touch. Then Sophia moved to the partnership agreement, the one I had revised, the silver bullet. "Your Honor," she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The prosecution would now like to enter into evidence the final, signed partnership contract between Monroe Innovations and TechCorp. Specifically, we would like to draw the jury's attention to Section 12, subsection C, under the header Personal Liability and Indemnification. She projected the clause onto the large screens in the courtroom. The dense legalese filled the screen, an impenetrable wall of text to most, but to me, it was a beautifully crafted piece of legal poetry. I saw Marcus lean over to Benson, whispering furiously. Benson just shrugged, his expression baffled. He probably hadn't even read that far, assuming it was standard boilerplate. That was his multi-million-dollar mistake. Sophia, a great teacher, explained it in simple terms. What this clause means, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is that the defendant, Mr. Marcus Monroe, did something unusual. He didn't just sign this contract on behalf of his company. He personally guaranteed the accuracy of the financial data he provided during due diligence. He made himself personally liable for any fraud. This wasn't a corporate mistake hidden in the accounting department. This was a personal guarantee, personal promise, a personal lie. A low murmur went through the courtroom. This changed everything. It wasn't about a faceless corporation anymore. It was about one man. Judge Harlan looked at the screen, then at the contract, then back at the screen. His face went pale. He finally understood. This wasn't a simple case of a company bending the rules. This was a complex, premeditated act with clear personal liability, and it crossed state lines, landing it squarely, undeniably, in the federal domain. His face went pale. He knew, in that moment, that he was presiding over a case that he had no legal right to judge. The foundation of the trial was crumbling, and he was standing right on the fault line. Judge Harlan cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense courtroom. The court will take a 15-minute recess. He banged the gavel, a sharp, panicked sound, and practically fled from the bench as if it were on fire. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Lawyers huddled. Reporters scrambled for the doors to be the first to report on the dramatic turn. I stayed in my seat, a small island of calm, watching the scene unfold exactly as I had predicted. I saw my father grab Marcus's lawyer, Benson, by the arm, his face red with apoplectic rage. "What the hell is that clause? Why didn't you warn us? What are we paying you for?" Benson, a man used to being the smartest guy in the room, just spread his hands helplessly. "I've never seen a clause like that in a standard partnership deal. It's custom drafted. It's diabolical." I took a quiet, grim satisfaction in that. It wasn't standard. I had written it. Through the crowd, I saw Judge Harlan in the hallway, speaking frantically into his phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic and relief on his face. He was calling the chief judge's office. He was calling Diane. He was officially handing off the grenade that had just landed in his lap. Just then, Sophia Chun spotted me from across the room. The confusion on her face was comical as she watched my complete lack of surprise. Then her sharp prosecutor's mind started connecting the dots. The last name, the quiet legal knowledge I'd shown at the mixer, the fact that I was still here, looking completely unfazed. "Monroe," she whispered to herself, a look of dawning, shocked comprehension on her face. Marcus noticed her looking at me. He followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. The smug confidence was gone, replaced for the first time by a flicker of genuine fear. He was starting to realize this wasn't random, that there was a design at work he didn't understand. That's when it happened. The same young clerk from before came rushing out of the judge's chambers. She ignored the frantic lawyers and reporters. Her path was straight and true. She walked directly to me. In her hand was a single, folded document with the official gold seal of the U.S. Court of Appeals. She handed it to me, her hand trembling slightly. "Thuanai," she said, her voice formal and clear, loud enough for those nearby, including my stunned father, to hear. "The order has been signed and executed." I unfolded the paper. It was the official reassignment order, signed by Diane Winters, time-stamped just 3 minutes prior. My plan, set in motion years ago, had just reached its inevitable, irreversible conclusion. The trap was sprung. The ghost was about to take center stage. When Judge Harlan returned to the bench, he looked like a different man. The panic was gone, replaced by a somber, almost weary, gravity. He looked like a man who had just been relieved of an impossibly heavy burden. The courtroom fell silent, a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. Everyone knew something was about to happen. They just had no idea what. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Harlan began, his voice steady and clear, all trace of his earlier confusion gone. After reviewing the evidence presented, specifically the nature of the contract in question, and its clear and direct implications regarding interstate commerce and federal securities law, I have come to a difficult but necessary conclusion. He paused, taking a deep breath, his eyes sweeping across the room. This case, in its current form, falls squarely and exclusively under federal jurisdiction. To proceed further would be a fundamental legal error on my part, jeopardizing the integrity of these proceedings. Therefore, I must officially recuse myself from this trial, effective immediately. A collective gasp went through the room. My father shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. On what grounds? This is an outrage. A delay tactic. Judge Harlan's gaze was like ice. Sit down, Mr. Monroe, or I will have you removed for contempt. My father, shocked into silence by the sheer authority in the old judge's voice, slowly sat back down. However, Judge Harlan continued, his voice rising. To ensure the swift continuation of justice and avoid any unnecessary delay, the Office of the Chief Judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for this circuit has, by prior arrangement, prepared for this exact contingency. He picked up a document from his desk, a copy of the order I now held in my hand. He looked out over the stunned faces, his eyes sweeping past the prosecution, past the defense, and landing squarely on me, in the back row. But he didn't address me directly. He addressed the court, the law itself. By order of the Chief Judge and pursuant to Title 28, Section 292 of the United States Code, this case is hereby reassigned to a judge with the appropriate federal jurisdiction. The new presiding judge for the case of the United States versus Marcus Monroe will be the Honorable Alexander Monroe of the United States District Court. Silence. A profound, deafening silence that seemed to suck all the air and sound out of the universe. It was broken only by a small, choked, whimpering sound from my mother. I watched my father's face. It was a slow-motion car crash of emotions. First, confusion. Did he say Monroe? Then, disbelief, it must be another Monroe, a cousin. A mistake. Then, as his eyes locked onto mine, the blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pallor of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother's hand was over her own mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, as if I had just risen from the dead right in front of her. And Marcus, my brother's face was a perfect mask of blank incomprehension. He stared at me, his brow furrowed, his brain unable to process the data. He turned to his lawyer and whispered, his voice cracking, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. That's not possible. That's my little brother. That's Alex. He's a nobody. The court clerk's voice, sharp and formal, cut through the silence like a knife. Will Judge Alexander Monroe please approach the bench? Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. I straightened my tie. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I didn't look at my family. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of their stunned, horrified gazes on my back. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Each step was a step out of the shadows, a step into the light. Ryan, my friend Ryan, had slipped in the back just in time to see it. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching with a look of intense, quiet pride. I reached the bench. Judge Harlan stood and gave me a slight, respectful nod. I nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the torch being passed. I ascended the 2 steps. I took my seat, the seat of power, the seat of judgment. I looked out at the courtroom, at the jury, their faces a canvas of utter astonishment, at the lawyers, their jaws slack. And then, finally, I allowed my eyes to meet my family's. I looked at my father, my mother, and my brother. For the first time in my entire life, they were seeing me, truly seeing me, and they were utterly, completely terrified. The recess that followed was the most intense 10 minutes of my life. I had just finished speaking with the court-martial in a small, sterile conference room, confirming the security protocol, when the door burst open without a knock. It was my family, an invading army of 3. Marcus came at me first, his face a grotesque mask of purple rage. His arrogance had been shattered, and what was left was ugly and raw. "You!" he hissed, jabbing a finger at my chest, his hand trembling with fury. "You planned this. This was a setup from the beginning. You've been plotting to destroy me. My own brother." My mother rushed in behind him, her face streaked with tears, her carefully constructed composure gone. "Alexander, how could you do this? To your own brother? To this family? After everything we've done for you? We gave you everything. Everything they'd done for me. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They had given me their spare change of attention, their leftover approval, while they had mortgaged their souls for him. I stood my ground, my hands clasped calmly behind my back. I looked past Marcus's rage and my mother's hysterics and met my father's eyes. He was the one I needed to speak to. "I didn't cause this situation, Marcus. You did?" I said, my voice cold and even, cutting through their noise. "Your greed, your arrogance. This is the consequence of your own actions." "My actions?" he sneered. "You tricked me. That contract, that was your little trap, wasn't it? You, the family loser, the quiet little nerd. You thought you could outsmart me. I gave you my best legal advice," I said, my voice unwavering. "It's not my fault you were too arrogant to take it or even to read it. I advised you as a brother. Now, I will judge you as a stranger." That's when my father stepped forward, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. He had been silent until now, just watching, the gears of his powerful mind grinding, trying to find a new angle, a new strategy. "Enough, Alexander," he said, his voice low and dangerous, the voice he used to crush business rivals. "This ends now, this farce. You will go back in there and you will find a way to make this go away. You will declare a mistrial. You will find a loophole. You owe this family that much." "Owe you?" I asked, a bitter laugh almost escaping my lips. "I owe this family nothing, and you seem to be confused, Dad. I am not your employee. I am a federal judge. And in that courtroom, I don't answer to you." Before he could respond, a new voice cut in, calm and solid as a rock. "Back off, Richard. Let the judge do his job." It was Thomas Whitaker. He had followed them, anticipating the confrontation. He stood in the doorway, his presence calm but unyielding, a barrier between me and them. My father turned on him. "Stay out of this, Thomas. This is a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter when it entered a federal courtroom," Thomas said, his eyes hard. He looked at me, then back at my father. "Yes," I said, "Judge. The career you all dismissed. The son you all ignored. Turns out he was the only one in this family who actually understands the meaning of words like honor and integrity." Vanessa, Marcus's fiancée, had been standing in the corner, pale and silent as a statue. She looked from Marcus's enraged face to my calm one, and the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for her. The lies, the arrogance, the casual dismissal of his own brother. She slowly, deliberately, pulled the enormous, multi-carat diamond ring from her finger. It had been the subject of a glowing society page feature. She walked up to Marcus, her eyes filled not with tears, but with a cold, clear disgust. She held out the ring. "I was going to build a life with you, Marcus," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "What life? This one, based on lies? On this poison?" She looked around at my furious family. "I need to call my lawyer. Consider this engagement over. I think a messy divorce from this family is better than being married into it." She didn't hand him the ring. She dropped it. It hit the tiled floor with a sickening, tinny clatter, a sound that echoed the shattering of their perfectly curated world. Then she turned and walked out without a backward glance. The sound of the ring skittering into a corner was like a final gavel. Returning to the bench was like stepping into a different reality. The robe felt like armor. The gavel in my hand felt like a scepter. The power in the room had shifted, and it was now entirely and rightfully mine. I ran the courtroom with a quiet, unshakable authority. There were no outbursts, no wasted words. I knew the case file better than the lawyers did, because in many ways, I had been preparing for it for years. My family saw a betrayal. I saw the culmination of a promise I had made to myself and to the law. I guided the proceedings with a surgeon's precision. When Marcus's lawyer, Benson, tried to argue that the infamous clause was unconscionable and deliberately obfuscated, I simply posed a question to him, my voice calm and resonant in the hushed courtroom. "Mr. Benson, was your client, a CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation and a man lauded for his business acumen, forced to sign this contract at gunpoint?" Benson stammered, No, Your Honor. But, and did your client, Mr. Monroe, I continued, cutting him off, not retain your own high-priced law firm for the specific purpose of reviewing this document and advising him on its contents? Benson's face turned a blotchy red. We advised him, Your Honor. Then it seems your advice was either ignored or inadequate, I stated, my voice flat. Either way, the signature on the document is his. The responsibility is his. Let's move on. The final blow came when I asked Sophia Chun to present her last piece of evidence. It was the recording from the CNBC interview. My recording. We all watched as my brother's smug, confident face filled the oversized screens in the courtroom. We heard him bragging about his legal instincts and how he had personally reviewed and approved every single line of the contract. He was, in his own words, taking full credit and full responsibility. He had just confessed on national television to understanding and agreeing to the very clause that would now be his undoing. It was a self-inflicted wound, a public declaration of his own hubris. I watched my family as the video played. My mother looked down at her hands, her face ashen, finally understanding the depth of her son's folly. My father didn't move. He just stared at the screen, at the image of his golden boy, his chosen legacy, hanging himself with his own rope of lies. For the first time, I think he saw Marcus not as an extension of his own ambition, but as a flawed, arrogant man who had made terrible, life-altering choices. The jury was out for less than an hour. The speed was a verdict in itself. When they returned, their foreman, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, handed the verdict to the clerk. The clerk handed it to me. I read it, my face impassive, though my heart was heavy. On the charge of wire fraud, how do you find? I asked. Guilty, the forewoman said, her voice clear. On the charge of securities fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On and on it went, a drumbeat of accountability. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Marcus's confident facade finally, completely, shattered. He slumped in his chair, a broken man, the sound of the word guilty echoing around him like the tolling of a bell. I looked down at my brother, not with pity, not with revenge, but with the cold, impartial eye of the law. Marcus Monroe, I said, my voice steady and formal. Please rise. He struggled to his feet, supported by his lawyer. The law doesn't recognize family ties or past grievances. It recognizes only actions and their consequences. And the consequences of your actions have been devastating, not just to your partners and investors, but to the very trust that our financial system is built on. I delivered the sentence. It was fair. It was just. And it was long. The Monroe legacy, the one my father had been so desperate to build, was now a legacy of crime and punishment. After the courtroom cleared, a cavernous, empty space that still echoed with the ruins of my family, I sat alone in my new, temporary chambers. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a profound emptiness in its wake. There was no joy, no triumph, just the quiet, heavy weight of what had just happened. A brother had sentenced a brother. A son had defied a father. A family had imploded in the most public way imaginable. There was a soft knock on the door. I knew who it was. Come in, I said, my voice weary. My father entered alone, closing the door quietly behind him. He looked older, smaller than I had ever seen him. The usual arrogance, the armor he wore to face the world, was gone, stripped away, leaving him looking vulnerable and lost. He stood there for a long moment, not speaking, just looking at me as if trying to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the man sitting before him. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said finally, breaking the silence. My voice was softer now. The judge had left the courtroom. I was just a son. He shook his head, a slow, tired motion. I know. His voice was raspy, strained. He cleared his throat. He'll go to prison, Alex. My son. My boy. Our son. I corrected him gently. My brother. He finally looked at me. His eyes filled with a complex, agonizing mixture of shame, grief, and something else. Something I had never seen before in his eyes when he looked at me. Respect. a grudging, painful respect. "You were right," he said, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "I was wrong. About you. About him. About everything. I pushed him. I wanted him to be me, but better. I wanted him to win so badly I forgot to teach him how to be a good man." He fumbled in his breast pocket and pulled out his thick leather checkbook. It was his go-to move, the only tool he had ever known to fix things, to exert control, to make problems disappear. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice desperate. "Can we hire a better lawyer for the appeal? A specialist? I can fund it, whatever it costs. I'll sell the properties, the stocks, whatever it takes." He was trying to buy his way out of this, to buy back his son, to buy my forgiveness, to buy back the world as he knew it. It was the only language he spoke. And that's when I knew this was the real test, the final confrontation, not the one in the hallway, but this quiet, desperate moment. "Put it away, Dad," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Just put it away." He looked down at the checkbook in his hand as if seeing it for the first time, a useless relic from a fallen empire. He looked confused, like a king whose currency was no longer accepted. "My integrity isn't for sale," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "And neither is my respect. You can't buy it. You have to earn it. And you haven't even started." I turned back to face him. "Do you want to help your son? Do you want to help this family? Then stop trying to fix this with money. For the first time in your life, just be a father. Write to him. Visit him. Not as a fallen CEO, but as your son. Help him figure out how to put the pieces of his life back together. That's what he needs. It's what he's always needed." He stared at me, the truth of my words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He slowly, painfully, put the checkbook back in his pocket. He had offered me everything he had, everything he valued, and I had refused it, and in its place, offered him a path that required something he had never learned to use: humility. In that moment, the power dynamic between us, the one that had defined my entire life, was finally irrevocably broken. He had nothing left to offer, and I had nothing left to prove. He just stood there, a defeated old man, finally realizing that the son he had ignored was the only one who could teach him how to be a father. 6 months later, the world had moved on. The headlines had faded into the digital ether. Marcus was in a medium-security federal prison in Pennsylvania, a place where the Monroe name meant less than a pack of cigarettes. My parents had sold their large, ostentatious house on the hill, the one that was always filled with important people but never with warmth. They had moved into a smaller, more manageable condo downtown. The empire had crumbled, and they were left to live in the ruins. I wasn't in my judge's robes. I was wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt, my hands covered in grease. I was in Ryan's garage, a place that felt more like home than my childhood house ever had. We were working on restoring a classic 1968 Ford Mustang, a beautiful machine that had been left to rot. The smell of oil and metal, the solid feel of a wrench in my hand. This was my therapy. This was my real life. "You know," Ryan said, his voice muffled as he slid out from under the car on a creeper, "for a guy who sends people to prison for a living, you're surprisingly good at setting the timing on a V8. It's all about precision and following the rules," I said with a grin, wiping my hands on a rag. "Not that different, really. You just get your hands a little dirtier." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the satisfying clink of metal on metal and the classic rock playing on the old, dusty radio in the corner. It was a peaceful, uncomplicated world. Then, a modest sedan I didn't recognize pulled up. My parents got out. It was the first time they had come to see me here in my world. Their visits over the past few months had been stiff, awkward affairs at my apartment, short, painful meetings filled with stilted conversation and long, gaping silences. This was a different step, a bigger one. My mother was holding a casserole dish with a dish towel wrapped around it, holding it like a peace offering. "I made that meatloaf you used to like," she said, her voice a little too bright. She avoided looking at the grease on my hands, her eyes darting around the garage as if she might catch a disease. My father stood a few feet behind her, looking deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. He was a man built for boardrooms and exclusive clubs. He looked at the half-assembled engine, at the tools scattered on the concrete floor, as if he had landed on a foreign planet. Ryan, ever the gracious host, wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. "Good to see you, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe. Can I get you a drink? We've got beer and, well, we've got beer." My mother managed a weak, fluttering smile. My father just shook his head, his eyes on me. He walked over, stopping a few feet away, careful not to get too close to the engine block. He looked at the car, then at me. I never understood this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the engine's exposed wires and pistons. "Working with your hands. Getting dirty. There's a satisfaction in fixing something that's broken," I replied, my voice neutral, letting the words hang in the air. He nodded slowly, the double meaning not lost on him. He was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching out, filled only by the music from the radio. I didn't push him. I just waited, letting him find the words he so clearly struggled with. Finally, he looked me in the eye. "I read about that ruling you made last week," he said, his voice quiet. "The one about the housing discrimination case. The newspapers covered it. It was a good ruling, Alex. A just one." It was the first time he had ever acknowledged a specific detail of my work with anything other than condescension. He started, then stopped, his jaw working. He took a deep breath. "I'm proud of you, Alex. And not because you're a judge, but because you didn't turn into me. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a Hollywood moment where all the wounds of the past were magically healed. It was clumsy and painful and real. It was the confession of a broken man trying to learn a new language. The language of respect. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. It was the first stone being laid for a new, and hopefully stronger, foundation. I nodded, accepting the offering. "Thanks, Dad." A few weeks later, a letter arrived. The return address was a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. It was from Marcus. I almost threw it away. I set it on my kitchen counter and stared at it for 2 days. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear his excuses, his blame, his anger. I had a vision of a letter filled with vitriol and threats. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering, deeply buried brotherly bond one thought was long dead, made me finally slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife. The letter wasn't what I expected. The arrogant, flowing signature I knew so well was gone, replaced by a tight, cramped, almost childish script. "Alex," it began. "They have a library here. It's not much, but it's quiet. I've been reading. A lot. I got the full transcript of the trial. I read it. All of it. Over and over. I read that clause you wrote, the one I never bothered to look at. It was brilliant. I hate you for it, but it was brilliant. You didn't just beat me, you outthought me at every turn. It's funny. In here, all the things that seem so important out there, the money, the headlines, Dad's approval, they don't mean anything. You're just a number. Your salary is 0. Your only shot at a promotion is getting a better job in the prison laundry. I've been thinking about that day you came home from school with your little poetry trophy, and I had my big debate championship trophy. Dad put mine on the mantelpiece, right in the center. He put yours in his desk drawer. I remember feeling so proud. I felt like I had won. Now I realize, looking back, that was the day I started losing. He taught me to value the shiny prize, not the hard work. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I wanted you to know. You weren't the family failure, Alex. I just had better PR. They have a program here where you can study law for a paralegal certificate. I'm thinking of signing up. Maybe I'll finally learn to read the fine print. Marcus. I folded the letter and put it away. There was no real apology, not in the way most people would expect. But there was something more important, something more valuable. A flicker of self-awareness. Painful, grudging respect. The golden boy was finally beginning to understand that all that glitters is not gold. It was a small twist in the story, a tiny sign that even the most broken things could, perhaps, one day begin the long, slow process of being fixed. My own definition of success had changed, too. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about quiet satisfaction. It was about an internal peace that had been missing for most of my life. It was about freedom. I was still a judge. I took the work seriously, pouring everything I had into it, because I knew firsthand that justice, or the lack of it, had real-world consequences for people's lives. But my life wasn't confined to the courtroom anymore. The job was what I did, not who I was. Success was the deep, throaty roar of the Mustang's 289 V8 engine when it finally turned over for the first time. A sound that made Ryan and me whoop with joy like a couple of teenagers. It was the look of pure, unadulterated happiness on his face as we took it for a test drive down a long country road, the wind whipping through the open windows, drowning out all the noise of the world. Success was having dinner with my parents once a week, where the conversation was still sometimes awkward, but it was honest. It was my father asking me to explain a legal concept to him, and actually listening to the answer, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was my mother admitting that the meatloaf she brought over was terrible, and all three of us laughing about it, a real, genuine laugh. It was freedom from the crushing weight of their expectations. Freedom from the constant, gnawing need for their approval. Freedom from the long, cold shadow of my brother. One afternoon, Diane Winters called me just to check in. "I saw your father the other day," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "At a fundraiser for the Legal Aid Society. He spent 20 minutes telling anyone who would listen about your housing discrimination ruling. He had a newspaper clipping of it in his wallet." He was practically beaming. I smiled, looking out my window. "He's learning. We all are." "It seems you're a good judge, Alex," she said, "both on and off the bench." That, I realized, was the real victory. Not the public vindication, but the private healing. Not just bringing justice to others, but finding a measure of peace for myself. A few months ago, I was invited to speak to a group of law students at my old university. They were all bright-eyed and ambitious, eager to make their mark on the world. They sat in the tiered lecture hall, looking up at me, expecting me to give them the secret to a successful career. I didn't give them a lecture on legal theory or courtroom strategy. I didn't talk about money or prestige. Instead, I told them a simple story my mentor Diane had once told me. "There were once two men who were tasked with building a great wall," I said, my voice quiet in the large hall. "The first man was obsessed with how the wall looked. He wanted the stones to be beautiful, polished, and impressive, so they would be praised by the king. He worked quickly, building high, focusing on the parts everyone would see. He wanted the glory. The second man was obsessed with the foundation. He spent most of his time digging deep into the earth, laying the heavy, unseen stones below the ground where no one would ever look. He worked slowly, meticulously, ensuring every stone was perfectly placed. He cared about strength, not praise. A great storm came, as storms always do," I continued, "and the first man's beautiful wall, with its shallow foundation, crumbled into a pile of dust. The second man's wall, the one built on a foundation of integrity, stood firm against the wind and the rain." I looked out at their young, eager faces. "Your career is the wall, but your character, your integrity, the hard work you do when no one is watching, that is your foundation. Build that first. Build it deep. Build it strong. The rest will follow." As I left the university that day, I didn't get into my official government car. I walked across the campus to the far parking lot where I had left the Mustang. It gleamed under the afternoon sun, a beautiful, powerful machine, a testament to patience and hard work. I got in, turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life, a deep, satisfying sound that vibrated through the seat. I put the car in gear and pulled out onto the open road, heading nowhere in particular, just driving. The wind whipped through the open window, carrying the scent of cut grass and freedom. I wasn't the shadow son anymore. I wasn't Judge Monroe, the family's avenger. I was just Alex, a man who had fixed something that was broken, a man who had built his foundation deep and strong, a man who was finally completely free. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way. Have you ever felt like the invisible person in your own family, or had to fight to define your own worth? It's a tough road to walk. Please share your own story or thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content. It really helps the channel out. Take care.